Hello and welcome back, this is ProTailDev back with another remaster video. So this time what we're going to be looking at is solely animation. We're going to be animating two of our enemies, like I said in the last video. It will be the plant and the ranged corrupted spirit. And we're going to be focusing just on animation this video because it's going to be quite long and in-depth, and any kind of future videos I want to kind of skip over the animation, maybe just show it and acknowledge what I'm animating but then quickly skip over it. So this is why this video is going to be a lot longer and just focus on that aspect. Just like the last video really focused on, in Blender, the rigging and material, and before that it was just a modeling. This one is just going to be for animation, but the animation is also going to be just in Unity. Very sorry about the weird movement of the screen, so for some reason I didn't notice it until I was editing, but the screen of my Unity moves slightly when I was recording. It's not too noticeable, it's not too bad. Hopefully you won't notice it and it's not too distracting. Anyway, let's get straight into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is bring in our own models, which we already have done, off screen, and then I wanted to create an empty game object where I put our prefabs in. Put our models in, our meshes, and then I'm going to turn those into prefabs. So this is for both different enemies, the ranged and the plant. And then what I do is I want to get the collision for our from the corrupted spirit that we've already done, our collision and our spotlight and everything, and then put that into our game object for our ranged. Save a bit of time, and then again turn them into prefabs. I then sort out the position of the lights and the collision, and then I set up another point light for our ranged because I want there to be two lights, like I've said in the modeling video where I did these guys. I basically want two lights, one which confirms they're an enemy, and the top light confirms what difficulty they are, how quick they're going to be shooting. Then what I do is I want to customize a little bit of the models of the material. So I said in the last video I would be kind of playing around with the materials. What I'm doing in this part is kind of replacing what materials I feel like it should be and adding some emission onto those materials, because I do want them to glow as well as kind of just be more specific and visible to the player. Then what I do is I specifically, after playing around with the material and kind of, I still want to play around with them. I'm not 100% sure I like this. I turn the point light into a spotlight. I think I do change it back, but I can't quite remember. I think eventually I do change it back. Then what I do is I want to start the animation. So first thing I want to work on is the actual body, so things like the arms and the position. So I'm going to handle just like the corrupted spirit we had before, the basic one. This range one will also be floating slightly up and down. These range ones, the movement later, I think I'm going to have it so that it hovers much slowly to the player. But with this guy, basically the hovering is going to be a little bit slower than the other guy, and just like the basic default version, it's going to be a small hover, but I actually make it much more slight, and then I do a little bit of minor changes manually to smooth it out. Moving on to the actual arms. So if you remember, these arms are actually individual objects, that way I can animate individual ones. So all four arms on each side, I can have them move. So that's what I do, I add them in here so that I can animate them, and then have them slightly move up and down using the rotation, and I get a nice little effect there that you can see a little bit. Again, skipping ahead quite far to the animation, the end of the animation of the arms, and then what I do here is I bring in the objects I want to animate next, which is the outer rings. I want the outer rings to basically rotate, so here I do some manual recording the keys specifically. I then change back to be more precise, which is putting in the numbers themselves from 90 degrees, 180, which is minus 90, and then another minus 90, and basically just add them all up manually instead of manually doing the circle rotation. I then make it so that the position of the rings within the outer ring also change slightly to kind of add a little bit of depth to the animation and the movement. And then do the same for the frontal rings that are inside the frontal outer ring. So there we go, that's what they both look like after the 2 rings are done. I do a bit of minor changes and smooth it all out off camera, what I've cut out, and then what I do is position the collisions to make them correct, and add in all of the scripts and all of the rigid body and everything that was basically on our on our corrupted spirit that we had previously onto our ranged. So that was finished. I basically had a quick look at it. I thought it was good. Just testing it out, shooting it, making sure that when it dies it drops the spirit ball, and I had 3 in there just to make sure it was also the light was hitting the ground and it was a little bit easier to see. So that's what it looks like currently. You can see the arms moving slightly. I'm probably going to make these enemies a little bit bigger as well than the other cursed spirits, simply because they seem a bit small to me. It could be just the way the lighting is, but I feel like they're a little bit small, so I'll probably make them bigger and scale them up. But yeah, that's the for these guys. What I also want to do is I want to kind of have the back ring rotate with the ring, and to do that it's very simple. I just move it around. This time again I'm doing it manually, so I get much more natural rotation of the circles, so it's not exactly. Again, I like that. I've mentioned in the past video that I don't like things exact. I think it looks unnatural, and there's different opinions on that, but that's my opinion. So I do this for both of the rings, have them rotate round, and then I'll add another frame in between these 4 frames that I've set up, so in between each of those frames to smooth out for each corner. So that's what I'm doing there, and then I'll replicate that same workflow for the other ring, that same process, and smooth it out again. Again, there's a lot of like things that I've cut out. This whole thing probably takes a total of maybe an hour to 2 hours, and then I move on to this animation. So this is the giant monster flower, and with this animation what I want to work on is specifically the start of it spawning. So I want to create different animations. So one of them is when it's underground in its very basic state, maybe when it's just been spawned in, I want it to be hidden underground. Then I want an animation for when it spawns in, an animation for when it's ready to move on to when it transitions from its spawned in state to ready for another different state, say an idle state. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just creating those clips that I can use and then edit. So this one's the spawn, very important one, and so I want it to go from its basic underground, which is at a position of -200 and something. I'll play around with that a little bit later when I'm actually having it fight the player, but here I'm just animating the actual bud. So what I want it to do is I want the petals I want the flower to actually bloom as it's being spawned in, and so this is really what's important. So I have a basic movement animated already for the position of it coming out of the ground. That was simple. That was me just changing the position of it, and now what I'm doing is animating individual petals to be able to curve and rotate individual bones. And this is why I need the rigging done. I prefer doing the animation in Unity. I feel it's a bit more easier than doing it in Blender, although there's a lot more advantages in animating in Blender. However, I just decided to do it in Unity instead, partially because I'm also familiar with the process of animating in Unity a lot more. So here I am, I've sped up. I've sped much further on in the video after I've animated pretty much all the petals, and I'm on the last one, or second to last one. There's still another bit over there, and this is basically when it's closed up and it's just a bud ready to bloom, and this will happen just as the flower is coming out the ground. I also then add in at the very center a light to make the center glow, so that the player can maybe focus on that specific point. I may change that later on because it doesn't quite make sense, because a lot of the flower isn't really visible at the top unless the player is above, say on platforms later on. I don't want the player to directly interact. Here what I'm doing is just in the controller, I'm just making it so that the animation will move on to the next, so it'll move from underground to spawn, just so I can see it. and then it'll move all the way back. That way I can see what it looks like as it runs through the animations. So here I am. This is sped up, obviously. I'm on a sped up timer, but basically I was able to see it come out of the ground, and I realized that it blooms too quickly. What I do is have it start blooming halfway through after it's already out the ground, because it already starts blooming when it's just coming out the ground, so it looks pretty much almost finished by the time it gets to the top. So that's what I'm doing here, is I just make sure that it blooms as it's coming up, and it's easier for the player to see. I'm just looking at the graphs here to maybe try and smooth out all different points, but at this point I've got a tremendous amount of keyframes in, and usually I bring up this point where I'm moving it out to remind myself that usually I work on the animation window on my other screen, because if you have so many bones to interact with, it becomes difficult to use when it's in the normal editor, so I usually have it on a second screen. Here what I'm doing is I've slowed it down so you can see what it looks like, so when it comes out the ground it basically blooms. What I'm doing here is I'm playing around with the lightings again. I want to add the lighting. So an issue I found is that obviously the lighting wasn't anchored to anything. It wasn't its parent needed to be the plant itself or a specific area so that it moves with it through the top. At the moment it was just staying in place and wasn't really animating, because obviously it wasn't animated. If I connect it as a parent, it will be animated with the whatever bone I've parented to. Now what I'm doing is I'm creating some materials. I'm playing around with the materials. Like I said in the last video, this is one of the advantages I had for having separate materials for different parts of the flower, because now what I'm doing is adding these custom materials in to try and play around with the colour. So there we go, it looks quite nice. I played around with the lighting again and decided to get rid of it and change it from a spotlight back to the point light, as I said earlier I would. And we've ended up with something that is a bit more generic and a little bit more natural. I think eventually I will get rid of that light in the center to have something else, but I haven't fully decided yet. It depends how the fights are going to be with this flower. Here what I'm doing is I move on to animating the stem, because I want the stem to actually move. I don't want it to be just a straight up, just a straight line. I want it to be moving, because it needs to be organic, it needs to be a flower. So here I'm going through every single bone, and this is where the disadvantage was, where I should have really named the bones. It would have been much easier to find out what the stems were. Here I've skipped kind of ahead after animating the stem. After animating the whole thing, I've kind of skipped ahead, and I'm now just animating different aspects of the spawn. I've moved on to the state after the spawn. So this next state is I've just called it Corrupt Giant Flower, and this is a state that moves from this to an idle state, or back from an idle state to this state to move into an attack state. This way what's happening is it will naturally basically move from state to state in a much more fluid way, if that makes sense. So here I am, I'm just playing around with the animation and trying to change the different speeds of it by moving it around, moving the keyframes around, and I just created an idle state as I mentioned, and this is a much quicker movement than what you just previously saw. And then I go back in the controller and sort out its path for the actual animations, and down here at this section what I'm pointing at is basically going to be where all the different attack sites going to loop back into that previous state of idle, or possibly before that, which is where it's the standard state before it moves into the idle. And here I am just looking at it. This is at normal speed. It's a little bit slow, so I've actually, after this, I speed it up slightly, a bit quicker, but I've cut that out of the video. So this is basically what it looks like. It's a nice little movement. And then I have a quick look at the movement of the rings of our range character, our ranged enemy, and I see it looks quite nice. So while this is playing, I'm basically pretty much done with the animation, and next time what we're going to be looking at is probably taking a little bit of a break from the animation and moving on to like some different pickups and abilities, because I want there to be 4 different pickups for our arm, so instead of just the projectile, and I'll go into that in the next video. Okay, so that's gonna do it. I'll see you all next time.